moment in the limelight, you know, because there's nothing wrong with dreaming big. There's nothing wrong with having these big aspirations. And in chess, it's so important to be confident. He has to believe in his abilities, especially if he's going to match the world champion. The only thing that I would say is he needs to be a little bit careful and just spot those tactical moments.
Okay, and we start with the Reti opening. White developing the knight out first, and then just pushing the pawn next to it to create a nice, safe space for the white bishop to fianchetto itself on a long diagonal. So we've seen this before from Magnus, actually, I think 2 or 3 times already this tournament.
Yeah.
And Hans, surely he won't be too surprised. Black occupying the center with pawns, white, meanwhile, staying a bit more flexible, just getting the white king castled, usually first, before deciding what pawns to push in the center. Are you surprised, Jovanka, that Hans is even thinking at this point, at this moment?
Yes, I am surprised that he's thinking, actually, because, like you say, Magnus has actually played this before. I mean, primarily, I'm thinking of his game against Jan-Christoph Duda in the first round. But having said that, Magnus has actually been playing more of the king's pawn forward this tournament, so maybe he's just having a pause and considering what to do. So he decides instead to develop his dark squared bishop.
Yep, so this is all very well-known territory and actually complete symmetry right now. The players kind of copying each other. White is the first to castle. Most likely black will do the same. There we go. Complete symmetry. This is one of the most frustrating things in chess when your opponent copies exactly what you do. I remember when I was first starting to play, my opponents would just do this and it just confused me. It got in my mind. But Magnus has had this position before in this tournament against Jordan van Foreest.
Exactly, yeah.
So he knows what's going on here. Magnus actually offers a pawn sacrifice. It's kind of the queen's gambit, but delayed, and the gambit wasn't accepted. Black didn't capture a pawn, and now everything protected for white. White has a small space advantage because he has 2 pawns on the 4th rank, and black is mainly trying to just build a solid wall himself. And Hans just looking off to the left there. He's trying to remember what he's analysed. For sure, this position isn't new to him. He's probably studied 3 or 4 different plans for black, and he's just trying to pick between them. OK, in the end, he brings his bishop out. And we'll see the moves continue to be played fast. This is still a very well-known kind of theoretical position. So white's fianchettoed both of the bishops. I like the setup just because the white bishops will come to life later on. But meanwhile, Hans, OK, pushing this pawn 1 square. That's quite rare.
That is rare. I mean, only 3 games in my particular database. It is kind of a little bit of a normal strategy, though, to kind of take control of the light squares and just prepare to push the B pawn 2 squares forward and to try to force white to determine the pawn tension.
Mm-hmm. So most likely, black will put all the pawns on light squares. And, OK, white bringing the knight out meanwhile. Very sensible by Magnus. And black also developing. And, yeah, later on, black will just build a wall. Maybe every single pawn will be on a light square, and it's just going to be hard for Magnus to break through that barrier. So, yeah, if you notice, all of black's pawns right now, apart from 1, is on a light square. I'm pretty sure Hans will try and play that move at some point later.
Yeah, having said that, you know, it just reminds me of something that happened with one of my team captains when I was playing in the European Team Championship or the Olympiad. They would joke, oh, Jovi and her light square strategy. She puts all her pawns on that square. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's true. I do.
And with black, all of your openings...
all of them involve putting my pawns on light squares.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know how it worked out that way, but it did. And I can recommend it.
Yeah, there's different types of openings. For example, the Slav defense or the Queen's Gambit declined. You put all your pawns on light squares. There are other openings where you put all your pawns on dark squares, like the King's Indian, the Old Indian. There's lots of different...
And is it a good idea to, so say you want to use maybe 3 different kind of openings, to use the ones that actually put the pieces on the same color? Is it, you know, some pattern recognition, something you can get out of it?
Yeah, you definitely can. Like, for instance, whenever I've faced against the Queen's pawn opening, I've always put my pawns on light squares, and the same goes if I've faced against the King's pawn opening. And I can, at occasions, interchange those plans that accompany the pawn structure.
Yeah.
It's just... I think it's just somehow a little bit strange, and it just means that I can also play other openings that involve putting my pawns on those light squares.
Yeah, and often when you start with the black pieces, the main goal is just surviving the opening. In order to win with black, you first have to equalize the position, and then you look for small imbalances, and then you try and play for a win later in the game. So in order to just survive the opening, it is quite a good strategy to put a pawn in the center, back it up with other pawns, and that's what Hans is doing right now. So he's just trying to equalize the position. According to the evaluation bar, he's done that, and now we just reach a middle game where it's all about maneuvering. Still every single pawn, every single piece on the board, and it's about who can put their pieces on better squares, who can activate, who can go for pawn exchanges, piece exchanges at the right moment. And the game will take a bit of a slower turn for the next few moves, while maybe Hans comes up with a plan, while the players debate which pieces to move, where to put them. But after that, as we saw in Magnus's game against Jordan, things do tend to explode a bit later in the middle game. Still very early stages and very tense right now.
I have to say I was a little bit surprised by Hans developing his knight, because I actually expected the knight to jump into the center. And the reason why I would expect the knight to jump into the center and offer itself up for trade is because if you look at black's position, it's somehow a little cramped. And there's this little thing that when you're suffering in terms of space, you try to swap off minor pieces. And the expression that I've heard and I use, and actually comes from Jesse Cray. And it says, you send your children to boarding school. Too many occupants in the house, so you send the kids off to school, and it just makes life easier.
So one idea that Hans uses right now is your one, Jovanka. Yeah, trade off a set of knights. And actually, space tends not to be an issue in any type of pawn structure once you've exchanged one set of minor pieces, knights or bishops. So black's pieces, if you look at the black knights, previously they were just fighting for the same squares. Now that's no longer the case. They're not in each other's way. We call them superfluous knights. One is often just useless if it can't occupy the square it wants to use, if its fellow knight is actually sitting on that square. So if your knights are in the way of each other, swap one knight off, the other knight becomes much happier.
What was the word?
Superfluous. It means kind of
superfluous knights.
I always
unnecessary
forget.
Or useless knight.
Superfluous knights.
Yeah, it's a complicated word, and I always forget it. You know, it's not one that rolls off the tongue. But yeah, it's a good word to know. And
you can be impressed if I ever ask you, oh, David, is this a superfluous knight?
I look forward to that moment.
Yes.
And meanwhile, just the last move, both sides bringing their rooks to the c-file, just in anticipation of things opening up. Still, it feels like both sides are kind of tiptoeing around. They're a bit scared to initiate any real trades, any real action. But the moment will come. And we'll keep updated with that.
It's typical first game in a knockout match.
Yeah, everyone's a bit cagey. You don't quite know how it's going to go. So you kind of just play a little bit slowly and wait for the action to start brewing at a later stage. And talking about action and entertainment, we still want everyone at home to be enthusiastic and excited about the chess. And we very much want you at home to be part of this experience. So please tweet us your thoughts, your move suggestions, even your selfies. We really love those. Remember to take them in landscape mode. And you can do all this by tweeting us using the hashtag #ChessChamps.
I'm really interested to see where people are following the chess now. Obviously, time of day is very different for our viewers. Someone is it's at night. Someone is working hours. Are you watching at school? Your job? Are you sitting at home? Are you home officing? Because of course COVID is slowly going away. So maybe people are starting to go back to the office and watching with some colleagues.
But hopefully they're not watching at school, because that would be a little bit naughty. And we don't advocate bunking off some lessons to watch our show.
But we won't tell the teacher.
That is, unless we read out their tweets. And their teacher is also in the staff room.
I want to know who people are supporting as well, because I know Hans has a huge online following. He was a streamer for many years in the US. He's very, very popular, of course, releasing courses, doing lots of things these days. And, Magnus, army of fans himself. So they're just shuffling his queen to a slightly better square. More importantly, though, it's not where the queen is placed, it's the fact that the white rooks are connected. And when your rooks are connected, they become much more flexible. Later, you can actually stack them up on the same line. For example, white might try and double his rooks on the c-file, or white's other rook will come, the one next to his king, it will come to the center, to the square the white queen previously sat on, because if things do open up, rooks in the middle of the board are far stronger than if they sit on their kind of home squares. So still very cagey, just dancing around each other. And at this moment, it feels like Hans maybe will initiate this knight trade because he's running out of other moves. The black queen can come out on her diagonal. Okay, he backs up his knight.
And here we have the old superfluous knight, Kaya. Take a look at that knight sitting, blocking in the dark squared bishop. It wants to jump into the centre, but lo and behold, its sibling is standing there. So that's why it's called superfluous knight.
Yeah, they both want to use this square, but only one knight can occupy that square at the right time. So, yeah, his idea is to actually get rid of one of them. For example, if Magnus moves the rook as we expected, just lining his rooks up on central files. OK, instead he's moved his knight into the centre, but I'm pretty sure Hans needs to get rid of one of these two knights now. They're just in each other's way. So trade one of them off. There we go. It happens. He's going to take this one off and then replace it in the centre with his other knight. And those superfluous knights have been separated now. And
he still has a knight on that great square.
Exactly. It's not quite an outpost. It might get kicked away later by a pawn. But first, you were attacking this bishop, so the bishop steps back. And Hans, if he wants, can actually evict the white knight from the centre as well with a pawn push. You've got to weigh up the pros and cons. You might kick away this white knight, but suddenly after the white knight retreats, your bishop will be blocked in behind a pawn. So pros and cons, you've got to weigh that up. And you also got to weigh up when the black knight steps back, because it will have to at some point due to white's pawn push. And OK, Hans, meanwhile, he's going for it. He's bringing his queen out. Some vague threats now, capturing a pawn. You don't want to get your queen trapped, of course. You've got to be very careful that pawn isn't poisoned. But at least he's creating threats. He's forcing the world champion to go onto the back foot. And the evaluation bar shooting up in white's favour. It's not clear why. But
I don't like it. Sorry.
You don't like black's move?
I don't like black's move at all. I'm thinking that, maybe kick back the knight. And, my favourite plan, basically when the knight moves, say it moves back, OK, well, Operation Kickback continues. And I'm going to kick you back one more time.
How do you Ivanka? This pawn push? This pawn push?
I was going to kick back the knight. I was going to kick you there. And then, yeah, once you even move backwards, and then I'm thinking, hey, let's begin. Let's maybe push the A3 pawn, the A2 pawn.
You can maybe even kick back the black queen with your bishop. Yeah. The black queen steps back. You kick back the black bishop.
Exactly.
The black bishop steps back, and suddenly we talked about being cramped. Look at black's pieces; they're really suffocating here, struggling for air, struggling for space. And that operation has begun. Actually, you're right, Ivanka. Everything comes with tempo. In chess, we talk about tempo. It means you force a move, you gain time on every turn. First, you kick back the knight. The knight steps back. Maybe it won't go the direction I mentioned because of your idea. But if it does step back here, which it wants to use the square, then suddenly you gain another tempo, forcing the opponent's reply, having to go back. You gain another tempo, forcing the opponent's reply. They have to go back. And again, once more, gaining all the time in the world. Every piece coming with a threat, every move coming with a threat. And in this position, maybe Hans just missing the moment. He wants to come and take this pawn, but just no time to do that. And first of all, your knight is under attack. And not too many safe squares. I don't think you can jump into the position. You want to, of course, protected by your queen, but this knight just gets trapped. And for example, this is a double attack, hitting the black queen, hitting the black knight as well. So you have to go back. And if you have to go back, it's a bad sign. You've lost time. So, Magnus really kind of sensing the moment and starting Operation Kickback.
And it's a very familiar plan to Magnus. I've seen him do it many times. I remember seeing him do it to Jan Nepomniachtchi in Norway Chess in their playoff match. And I had a word with Magnus afterwards, and I was like, why did Nepomniachtchi allow that? And he said, yeah, it was a bit strange, wasn't it? So I was very proud of myself when I spotted this, that I was on the same wavelength as the world champion.
Yeah, and it's very standard, it's very natural as well. And I think Hans now, the reason he's been thinking for 2 minutes is he's realised he's in maybe not massive trouble, he's not losing or anything, but he's really going to have to start just retreating everything and going back to square one. And OK, he goes back in this direction. So at least he doesn't lose time having to retreat his knight again after any pawn pushes. But I'm expecting Magnus to start either hitting that black light square bishop, as we showed with the pawn, or maybe even driving back the black queen with white's dark square bishop.
Yeah, I like attacking the queen. The queen is doing nothing there. You might as well get a free move. And then, again, you still have the plan of Operation Expansion with the pawns. So I really do think that Nepomniachtchi? Where did I get that from?
We just talked about it.
Yeah, I know. Hans Niemann is struggling a little bit, too cramped.
Yeah, maybe they both begin with N, right? Niemann, Nepomniachtchi.
Yeah, too many things going on in my brain. And whilst Magnus is pondering whether to initiate Operation Kickback or not, I do want to share with you some selfies that we've already got.
Oh, wow.
Oh, well, wait 1 second. It is Kickback, but it is central expansion.
Yeah, that's greedy, gaining all the space, pushing a pawn, hitting black's bishop, and the black bishop had to retreat. You notice in the center there's some tension between some pawns, but every white pawn is protected by another pawn. So white has this kind of nice formation. All of white's pawns, if you notice, they're pointing towards the center. Black doesn't want to trade anything off because that would only help open up white's pieces. And Magnus there, after the black bishop retreated, dropping back his knight. And I'm trying to work out whether black can be super greedy here. The black queen sitting on the side of the board, she could go and grab a pawn, but it feels like that is almost suicidal. It feels like the black queen would get trapped if that happens.
It does look like that, right?
Yeah. We have to jump in because this is actually a pawn sacrifice by the world champion. We showed that this pawn push, attacking the black bishop, drove the bishop back, and a really subtle retreat. So white's knight now is actually quite flexible on this square. It's a dream square in a lot of queen's pawn openings. He wants to go this way maybe to take the bishop. He wants to go maybe this way forward and to capture the bishop. And if, as mentioned, black takes this pawn, which I would be very tempted to do because I'd be scared of the position anyway as black. You might as well have something to suffer for. But I think Magnus's idea is possibly to jump forward with his knight to this square. And now not only do you attack this bishop, not only do you attack this pawn, but you also threaten to trap this black queen. And yeah, the reason you couldn't trap this black queen on the previous move is because the queen can actually capture this pawn. This is the only escape route, so you might as well bring your knight forward first to defend this square. But meanwhile, Hans, he didn't pluck up the courage to play that move. That would have been extremely risky. Instead, he brings his bishop to the side of the board, attacking the white rook. And the white rook can move, of course. It ideally wants to keep this pawn under protection. But OK, Hans at least trying to disrupt white's piece coordination. The threat is this rook, of course, and still Magnus has to calculate what happens on the next turn if black does go and grab this loose pawn in the corner. It's starting to heat up, definitely. And it feels good for white just because white occupies the center. White's pieces are more centralized, but still a bit of hard work to do for Magnus to prove that that actually is meaningful.
Yeah. I mean, here's the kind of candidate moves that you would look at. It's like step forward with the rook. That would be something that maybe is a little bit of a no-brainer, just on the basis that you can use the analysis that we worked out from the move before. Another one move would be like actually maybe stepping forward with the knight to attack the bishop. Mm-hmm. And just saying, hey, let's you've weakened your king a little bit. Let's start looking at some pieces. So those are the kind of main moves that I would be looking at. Yeah, and we could see a really cool pawn structure here if black actually captures this knight. So white will have doubled pawns, but just look how strong these four are right now. We talk about controlling center. These four pawns together, just super powerful. So that could have happened, but Magnus, actually it might still happen. Yeah. Magnus instead flicking in a different move, what we call an intermezzo or Zwischenzug, like an in-between move. Before dealing with a threat against his rook, he counters against the black queen, so a counter threat. And attacking the queen, of course, and most importantly, defending this pawn now in the corner. The black queen has to retreat. Yeah, I'm trying to make a point of it. I'm not using an engine until I really, really need it. And so I'm trying to make a point of like CCT, checks, captures, threats. And yeah, I forgot about this one. Yeah. Tour. CCT. Champions Chess Tour. Oh my God. Yeah. How did that never, ever occur to me? Did it ever occur to you? CCT. Checks, captures, threats, Champions Chess Tour. That's literally Chess Player 101, the first thing you learn, the first thing you have to remind yourself every move on every game, CCT. It's a match made in heaven. Oh. I know. Champions Chess Tour. Never have to remember anything again. Just Champions Chess Tour. Checks, captures, threats. Exactly. Gosh. This is mind-blowing, isn't it? What a moment, you guys. Oh. Yeah, it really feels like that eureka moment there. You just told me, I was like, oh my goodness me, never ever occurred to me. And Hans stepping back with his queen. Very unfortunate move, but okay, it had to be done. Yeah, going back the whole way, ooh, to me it looks a bit weird. It just looks like a loss of time. Black's queen, of course, came from this square, what was it, 4 or 5 moves ago. It came out and then it had to go back. To me, I would have maybe stepped to a different diagonal just to provoke maybe white to push some pawns. But OK, Hans just playing the safe option. And at least the black queen won't get hit anymore. White won't gain any more time against her. And Magnus has played
quite fast so far. The other matches are, of course, going on as well. And I did see the bar actually all the way over to Liam Le's side in his first game today against David Navarra. And now all of these matches will contain 4 rapid games. And when they finish a game, they have 15 minutes, no matter what happens in the other matches. 15 minutes, and then they start the next game. So we're going to have chess going on all the time today. It's going to be super fun.
Yeah. And whilst Magnus is pondering, finally I can share with you the selfies. So Abhishek says, my budgie Minu isn't very friendly with me. Can a game of chess help improve the relationship? And there he is. Very cool yellow room. And there's a little budgie there.
What's a budgie?
A budgie is a bird. It's a budgerigar. It's a small little bird. Very. I used to have one as a pet. Long time ago.
Really?
Yeah, but it died, obviously.
Oh, no.
And that was my first and last time. His name was Pedro. And Haig says, me and Magnus.
Ooh, that's a good way to spend the day, Haig.
Yeah, definitely is.
Yeah.
And keep those selfies, keep those questions and those comments coming. And you can do that by tweeting us using the hashtag #ChessChamps. We will try and feature them on the show.
Did you have any pets when you were a kid, David?
No, unfortunately not. My mother was afraid of all animals.
Oh.
So maybe one day.
Maybe one day. What would you have if you...
I always envisaged myself with a tiny little cute dog.
Oh, like a chihuahua?
Yeah, he could be my wingman when I'm out on the streets.
Yeah, that's true.
I wanted a tortoise at some point in my life.
yeah.
I even had the name picked out, Lola. Lola the tortoise. It's like amazing.
But I heard the tortoise, they will outlive their humans.
this I didn't think it through. It was only until my husband said, hey, you are prepared to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, maybe that's a bit of a commitment. So I said no.
Okay, and actually quite a big moment in the game. So Magnus got his rook out of the eye line of the black dark squared bishop. That rook was under fire, and now also lining itself up with the black queen. If you look on the central file and the D file, really good strategy. It just makes the opponent feel uncomfortable if their queen is being stared at by a rook, even if there's some stuff in the way at the moment. When the position opens, the tactics will work now in white's favour. And black can actually grab a pawn, but I don't think he should. Hans, okay, he doesn't grab any of the white pawns in the centre, because that would have allowed white's knight to jump forward, and that would have been really scary for black. So Hans now, with these pawn pushes, especially his last pawn push, he has limited the action, the activity of the white knight. So I think that last move was very, very important. And that was nice from the teenager, just controlling the position. He's still struggling, purely because he's lacking space and white's central pawns are so strong. But at least he's not losing immediately. He's not facing any immediate kind of setbacks. I think sometimes in chess, even if you've got a worse position, even if you've got a disadvantage, you need to take the time out just to stabilize and survive for a few moves. Because this is the type of advantage for Magnus, which may or may not disappear over the next 3 or 4 moves. It's nothing immediate. It's nothing material. And look at this, Magnus already starting to retreat with his knight.
Yeah. I think he's doing it for a concrete reason, right? Because he wants to control the G4 square. Just in case Hans wanted to exchange the king's pawn in the center.
Okay, so we can show this, and I'm surprised, I must admit, it wasn't even on my radar. But as you mentioned, if Magnus had just pushed pawns, this is a very Magnus type of move, gaining space, getting ready for the endgame, to push pawns further up the board. Then one idea there you mentioned, Jovanka, is to actually start initiating those trades, taking pawns, and then starting to bring the bishop across, hitting the white queen, hitting the rook behind it, and suddenly some quick moves. The white knight dropped back, covering that key square, and Hans decided now is the moment. And to me, it feels like the wrong moment, but possibly he just couldn't wait any longer. He did initiate some trades, and it's all about these pawns now. There's a threat of bishop takes pawn, hitting the white queen and the rook behind it, using the black bishop. But the question is, can white advance? Can white step forward with this guy or this guy? Hans thinks no.
That is the acid test, right? I mean, can we try it out on the board?
Yeah, I think the key move here is whether this pawn push works. Just trying to, remember, break through using the rook on the same line as the black queen. But after pawn takes pawn, maybe there's an issue for white, because ideally you want to capture towards the center. You don't want to capture away. You want to capture this way, but unfortunately, the bishop is hanging. So some calculation to be done here. It's still really complicated. And,
yeah, he goes for it anyhow, because there are a lot of captures in the position, actually. Yeah, I mean, for instance, okay, so a pawn takes now, you can...
And we have this position that we just showed on the board. So, for example, now after rook takes bishop, it looks like a free bishop, but after white recaptures the black bishop, there is actually a double threat, hitting the black queen, and next move, maybe just going to capture this pawn with a check. And I think this is quite likely to happen. Black's queen now can just dodge out the way. I'm not sure which square is best, but after a pawn trade now, it's still very, very tense. White's pieces are actually not as active as they were previously. And black does, okay, this is about to happen. Black does have a nice bishop, a nice queen, nice rook, controlling lots of squares, but white can start pushing forward again, pushing this guy, pushing this pawn next, and white's moves all come with threats. So, okay, this one, it feels like black should be fine somehow, but still, it feels like Magnus in the driving seat. Just because he can start pushing. And also, white's king is safer than black's. If you imagine, for example, white getting just one more move, pushing forward in the center, hitting the black knight, then suddenly white's bishop is going to be far stronger than this block of wood on the side of the board.
And it's definitely heating up in all of the other quarterfinal matches as well. Look at the bar, Liam Le, looking good for him against David Navarre in game 1. The bar just went all the way over to Duda's side in his game against David Anton. And world number 3, Ding. The bar is liking it for him against Jordan van Fore's game 1. Bunch of moves.
A bunch of moves, and very similar to what we predicted, but Magnus actually went for this line without trading a set of pawns. So Magnus, he's definitely been influenced by Daniel Dubov, studying with him, because earlier he tried to give up a couple of pawns. It wasn't accepted by Niemann. He gave up a couple of pawns earlier. A few moves later, it wasn't taken by Hans Niemann, and finally, black is a pawn up. But look at this. The kickback has started again. Black's knight under threat.
I get what he's trying to do. So Magnus is playing purely in a positional way. He's just saying, look at black's bishop, locked out of the game. I'm going to be a piece up.
Yeah, I mentioned it's basically a block of wood, this bishop. And the black bishop, the only way to break out of this cage is to sacrifice itself at some point. Hans here, he would love to trade off all the pieces just to get out his bishop from behind white's strong pawn chain on the dark squares here, but it's just not possible. And Magnus, if he's clever, will find a way of just keeping this bishop caged while, as Jovanka mentions, just pretending he's a piece up. Black's actually the pawn up in this position. He goes for a trade. Slightly surprising. Maybe that black knight too strong, but either way, the white knight better than the black bishop.
How impressed are you now with the way Hans has defended this? It didn't look too good for a while there.
Yeah. Well, despite what the computer is saying, I wouldn't say it looks too good for him now. I mean, Hans has to tread very accurately because, as David mentioned, the bishop, not great piece, is just jammed in by white's pawns. So black could be, in effect, a piece down if that bishop doesn't get motoring, doesn't fire way out. All Magnus needs to do is start playing in the center, use his extra knight, and it will be such a dreadful position for Hans. So he's not out of the woods yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of impressed by both players. Magnus, because he's trying to go for this long-term kind of domination, just controlling the black bishop. But Hans, he did, okay, wow, talking of bad pieces, he's decided that that black bishop was so bad, he's sacrificed it. He's given it up for just 2 pawns, and suddenly the white king is a bit open, but Magnus frowning, he's surprised. That move, so brave. I mean, you're a piece down now, and white's knight keeps the king relatively safe. So Hans upping the stakes, and I don't think that was necessary. I think he was just maybe, I mean, he's a confident player, Hans. Maybe he's overestimating his chances here, or maybe he just thought there was nothing better. But this was just a last-ditch, kind of last resort type of move, and he played it really relatively quickly. Jovanka, I mean, I'm a materialist. I prefer having the white knight here over the black pawns. What do you think?
Well, actually, having sat next to you all this time, I'm like, hang on a second. White has the perfect defender. A knight is a king's best friend. So I don't think white is in any danger whatsoever. So I agree, a bit too eager. Maybe Hans was panicking a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, his bishop was not the best piece in the world, as we were saying, but I don't think that was the right moment to sacrifice. There are actually no current threats on the board. No matter what black does next, white's rooks can block. I mean, the white rook next to the king, you can even centralize that, double the white rooks on the d-file, maybe even go for the black king, which lacks defenders. And yeah, a piece for 2 pawns. If all the queen's rooks disappear, it's just a simple win for white with the extra knight. So yeah, Hans definitely, he's playing against maybe Magnus's clock, Magnus's nerves. He just wants to find that kind of chaotic position that we were talking about before the show. Maybe it was just his match strategy beforehand, just not allow any slow, quiet kind of maneuvering endgames. It's all about chaos, and maybe it's just a practical decision here.
Yeah, could also be part of the Magnus effect. You're like, well, you know, I don't want to suffer. He's probably going to torture me for a long time. So let's just do it. Let's take that risk. And unfortunately, this can backfire because, as you'll probably find out, Magnus is a great defender.
Yeah, that's the thing. Many players think, oh, Magnus is going to beat me anyway, might as well go down in flames. But sometimes that speeds up their own defeat. And OK, meanwhile, White's knight has centralised itself, offering a trade of rooks. As we mentioned, trades long-term should help White with the material advantage now. But a knight versus 2 pawns, it's not completely over. So still some fight left. And the evaluation bar still thinking Black has some chances. It's not all one-way traffic.
Yeah. One move I don't think that Black should be playing is trading rooks. If you trade rooks, then it actually helps White because the queen is quite nicely placed on next to her king, because Black's king is unsafe as well.
Problem is, what else? Where do you run away from if you don't want to trade off this set of rooks? And
Okay,
he does that.
He does take it.
The Black rook, in order to avoid this trade, would have had to kind of flee to one of the sides of the board, and then this White rook on the f-file would have been really scary, pointing towards the Black king. So
true.
Maybe just, yeah, I agree. You don't want to swap rooks, but maybe there was just no other choice. Process of elimination.
So what do you think will be the result of this game? I mean, what looks the most likely right now?
To me, Magnus winning.
Okay.
Yeah, agreed. I think maybe if the players were both under 1 minute or so, then Hans would have decent chances because the White King is maybe slightly more open than its counterpart. But Magnus having 4 minutes, that feels like enough to convert this. And we've seen it before, actually, last month in the Air Things Masters and in the prelims between these two players. As soon as Magnus got a material advantage, he converted it very smoothly. In the prelims, it was actually similar. It was kind of a slower start, and then it just blew open the centre, kind of burst into life the game. But then as soon as it calmed down again, Magnus won very, very smoothly. And there we go, the rook recaptured. And look at the White Knight. It's such a strong piece. It stops the Black Rook from coming down to the bottom board to the first row and attacking the White Queen and King.
And why did it take with the queen and not the king?
That's a good question. I think maybe the king would have been okay too, but maybe I think Magnus had foreseen that the Black Rook was coming down to the second rank anyway, and the White Queen would have come under fire. So it's just a timing thing. The Rook was coming here anyway. Why not just get the White Queen out of the way first instead of wasting a move and then having to move her again anyway?
Yeah.
But yeah, right now, this Black Rook at least trying to cause some damage, attacking a couple of pawns, and Magnus just bringing his queen up. Okay, interesting. He's actually gambiting his pawn in the corner here. We've talked about that White A2 pawn, Alice the A pawn, a couple of times already this game. And earlier, Hans didn't take that pawn. Can he get away with capturing it now? That's the big question.
And wouldn't it look quite nice for those two black pawns on that side then, if it's open?
Be a dream if
it
he
would
can
be a
take
dream, but he also needs White to trade off queens as well.
Okay.
Because whilst the queens are on the board, both kings are unsafe, there's a lot of danger. So, I mean, the principal thing that Hans is considering right now, if he captures that pawn, he concedes the C line. And maybe White will put a rook there and start asking some questions.
Yeah, some real, problems here, possibly for Hans, if he gets greedy and captures this pawn. It's the first move on my radar. It's the first thing Hans will be calculating as well. If you can take a pawn, now suddenly you have 3 black pawns in return for the White Knight. Endgames might even be in your favour. The White Knight will be stretched. But as Jovanka mentions, there's a couple of moves here that are very tempting for White. The Rook can... OK, he doesn't go for it, understandably. The Rook can slide across, attacking the Black Queen.
The Knight can move.
Yeah. Also, if you notice, these two pieces are on the same diagonal. White has a big threat of checking in the centre of the board and hitting both of those two pieces at the same time. And as Jovanka mentions, the White Knight can move, maybe to block in the Black Queen, hem it in. The White Pawn can step forward, maybe going for a direct checkmate. Too much to calculate there, too many scary moves. I think on this occasion, greed was not good. So Hans, his sense of danger was kind of alert there. So he just moved his king forward off that diagonal that I mentioned. And now the pawn stepping forward, which looks really scary, trying to support a queen check, would simply be met by queen takes pawn on this square. And or maybe even a queen check here. It's a lot of checks for both sides to work out right now.
So, I mean, Hans has these pawns, and he has a rook on that dream second line. So what is the star player here for Magnus? Is it simply that knight he has, or why is the bar liking it more for Magnus?
Yeah.
It likes the knight.
Yeah.
It likes the knights over the two pawns that Black has. I mean, that's the basic issue at the minute. And also, you know, White's rook is quite good. White's queen is also quite good. But it's mainly the knight.
Okay.
And if you compare the two pawns, at the moment, they don't really do too much. The two pawns Black has in return for the knight are these two. I guess one of them, this one, guards the Black king, so that's a decent pawn. But this pawn, while the heavy pieces are still on the board, the queens and the rooks, it's not really going to start advancing anytime soon. It will just be captured. So it's better to have a piece in general which is so flexible, which is a good defender covering this first rank, but also maybe an attacker later on going towards the Black king. And yeah. I mentioned the endgames favouring White, but there are some endgames, especially if this pawn in the corner drops, where the knight is not as good as the pawns. And wow, Magnus is going for it now. He's bringing his knight. He's threatening a deadly check, hitting the Black king and queen at the same time. But the knight is no longer a defender. So this is a nasty check. And how is White going to run out of this? You have to step up the board. There we go. Magnus running away from the check. And is he going to continue running? For example, if the rook checks the White king, do you have to step up the board again?
Ooh.
And wow, the king, the only way to find safety is to run behind your own pieces. And the problem is the Black rook cannot really step up to create this pin now because there's a knight fork, remember, check, and winning the Black queen. And okay, this one's really heating up. The queen has come down to check the White king. And now I think Magnus is going to do the same. He's going to hide somewhere on the edge of the board. Is he going to step here or here? Oof, really big decision.
It is a big decision because there are a lot of checks on the board. So if you step forward with your king on a light square, then the queen can come and check diagonally.
Yeah.
And the game continues, right?
Yeah, and if you go the other way, Jovanka,
If you go up the board, then the rook will come and give check. And if the king goes to the light square again, it's a diagonal check. And this time it's even worse. You're going to get probably mated there.
Yeah, this king is definitely going to get checkmated. So I think his only idea, okay, was to block with the knight. I think maybe he could have stepped up the board and then blocked with the knight in this direction. Now stepped back, but okay, the move's coming really fast now. Big threat on the board. The White knight actually stepped back as a defender, and now Hans is trying to line up on the first rank a nasty check behind the king and behind the queen. Magnus has to be really careful now. This is a deadly threat. He has to use his queen to cover this square, I feel. Maybe this square or this square. You've got to be, you've got to be careful.
You've got to be very careful because if the queen loses connection with her rook, then there will be moves like rook takes...
and then a check.
Yep.
And he has ticked under the minute, Magnus Carlsen. Now, you did say a few minutes ago, David, then that would be chances for Hans Niemann.
Yeah, definitely chances. He's done a great job of keeping up the pace. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but maybe Magnus needs to find this move, dropping the queen back. Maybe we can go back to the players and see what Stockfish says, the top computer suggestions here, because Magnus, under 30 seconds, he's got a narrow path to survival. And, okay, White does have a few moves to survive. The knight jumping forward to the G3 square is the best move. That's really difficult, though.
That is difficult.
Moving the White knight.
Dropping the queen back, also good. Anything else, it's going to spoil the win. It's going to be a draw.
Okay, so we see a third move there from Stockfish, but Magnus doesn't play any of the top three suggestions. Will we see a turnaround now? Black's back in the game. Black can give a check with his rook. Oh, suddenly the White king is really not safe.
And Hans still more than 4 minutes on the clock. He finds a move as well.
Finds the best move. And look at this White king walking out into the open. This adventure might not end well for it, though. The Black queen can slide across behind the White knight. Suddenly, from every angle, the White king is getting attacked.
And that's what Hans does. And some really dangerous checks in the air. I mean, is it going to be at least a draw for Hans Niemann?
Feels like, I think at this point, Magnus wants the draw. Magnus would love to see the position repeat itself. And he pushes a pawn. At least now he's opened up a diagonal towards the Black king. So White's queen can step forward with some checks, maybe. So now Hans, I think you're right, Jovanka, if he wants, he can maybe force a draw by stepping with the Black queen to the F2 square. And White's king is not actually going to be able to escape the checks. There's going to be a repetition of the position, but maybe Hans wants more.
Wow.
And
2 games have already finished with the winner, Liam Liao winning the first game against David Navarra and Ding Liren winning the first game against Jordan van Forest. These players have 15 minutes, and then they start game number 2. But Liam Le and Ding Liren in the lead in their quarterfinals now. And the question, will Magnus Carlsen be in the lead after this? Or even Hans Niemann now?
Yeah, I mean, all 3 results are possible, despite the computer saying 0.0. The momentum is all in Black's favour. He's turned it around. White has completely lost control. White's king is so open as well, but White still has this extra knight. So if he can survive the onslaught, okay, this is the second time we've seen this position. We saw a check, another check. Is Magnus really going to play for the win? He's considering it, but only 35 seconds. In order to play for the win, you either have to go up the board with your king, which looks terrifying, or you go back and you run to the left side of the board. But, okay, is he really going to go for it? No, he doesn't. The players bail out with a draw.
Wow. What a, well, I'm going to say what a game by Hans Niemann.